Sometimes life doesn't just knock you down, it strips away everything you've worked for, leaving you with nothing but memories and choices you never thought you'd have to make. That's what happened to Margaret Reynolds one sweltering August afternoon as she gripped the steering wheel of her 13-year-old sedan, knuckles white, eyes fixed on the dusty Montana road stretching before her. The car was packed to the brim with hastily boxed possessions, the remnants of a life in Seattle that no longer belonged to her. Beside her, Lily, her 24-year-old daughter, stared out the passenger window, arms crossed, her expression as barren as the landscape they passed through. The silence between them had grown thick over the 8-hour drive, broken only by occasional directions from the GPS and the hum of the struggling air conditioner. "We should be there in about 20 minutes, Margaret said, glancing at her daughter. Lily didn't turn. "Great," she replied, the single word carrying the weight of everything she'd left behind. Her marketing job, her apartment, her friends, her independence. 6 weeks ago, Margaret had been a restaurant manager with 12 years of experience. Then the restaurant closed without warning, and at 47, Margaret discovered how quickly potential employers could find reasons not to hire someone her age. The severance package had barely covered 2 months' rent. Now they were down to their last few $100s, with no place to call home except the abandoned adobe house her grandmother had left her 6 years ago, a place Margaret hadn't set foot in for nearly 15 years. "You know, this doesn't have to be forever," Margaret said, breaking the silence again. "Just until we get back on our feet." Lily turned this time, her blue eyes, and so like her father's, sharp with contained anger. "I had my feet under me just fine, Mom. I was handling things." "With what money, Lily? Your company laid you off 3 months ago. You were behind on your rent before I even lost my job. I had interviews lined up. I was networking. That's how it works now. And I could have found a roommate." Margaret bit her tongue. They'd had this argument too many times already. The truth was they needed each other now, financially if nothing else. But Margaret knew her daughter viewed this as regression, being forced back under her mother's wing after tasting freedom. The GPS announced their final turn, and Margaret steered onto a narrow dirt road lined with ancient cottonwoods. In the distance, a small structure emerged from the landscape, a low-slung adobe house the color of the earth itself. As they approached, the details became clearer. Cracked walls, a sagging porch, windows clouded with years of dust and neglect. Margaret parked and shut off the engine. The sudden silence felt heavy. "This is it?" Lily asked, her voice barely audible. "This is it," Margaret confirmed. "Grandma Eleanor's house. It looks like it's about to collapse." Margaret gazed at the house, memories flooding back, some sweet, others painful. "It's sturdier than it looks." Adobe houses are built to last. Where are you listening from today? Comment below and subscribe if you're enjoying this story. I've got something special coming tomorrow that you won't want to miss. The front door protested when Margaret pushed it open, hinges screaming from years of disuse. Inside, the air was stifling, dust motes dancing in the shafts of sunlight that pierced through the grimy windows. Sheets covered the furniture, once white but now gray with years of settled dust. "We can't live here," Lily said flatly, standing in the doorway. "It's not habitable." But Margaret had already stepped further inside, her hand reaching out to touch the worn kitchen table that dominated the main room. Despite the dust and disarray, she could still see her grandmother standing there, rolling out tortillas with weathered hands, laughing as she told stories of the old days. This house had been the only real home Margaret had ever known, at least until she was 17 and thought she knew better than everyone who'd ever tried to love her. "It needs work," Margaret admitted, turning to face her daughter. "But it's ours. We own it free and clear. No rent, no mortgage, and it once was beautiful." Was being the operative word, Lily muttered, but she finally stepped inside, looking around with reluctant curiosity. They spent the remaining daylight hours exploring the house, taking inventory of the damage. The roof leaked in several places, The plumbing groaned when Margaret tested the faucets, and half the electrical outlets didn't work. But the bones of the house were sound, and most of the furniture, once uncovered, proved salvageable. In what used to be Eleanor's bedroom, Margaret found Lily standing by the window, running her hand along the sill. "What's this?" Lily asked, pointing to something etched in the concrete windowsill. Margaret came closer, her heart skipping when she saw what her daughter had found. A small handprint pressed into the cement, with the carefully inscribed words, "Lily, age 5, beside it. "That's your hand," Margaret said softly, "from the summer we spent here when you were little." Lily stared at the tiny handprint, then at her own adult hand. "I was here before? I don't remember that. We came every summer until you were 6. Then why don't I remember it? And why did we stop coming?" Margaret turned away, busying herself with removing more dust covers. "It was a long time ago. And sometimes it's easier to forget things." "What does that mean?" "It means we should focus on making this place livable. We'll need to clean everything, patch the roof, get the plumbing working properly." Lily studied her mother's face, clearly recognizing the deflection. "You're not telling me something. I'm telling you we have work to do if we're going to sleep here tonight," Margaret replied, her tone making it clear the subject was closed. That night they camped on the floor of the main room, having cleared away enough dust to make a space for their sleeping bags. The desert night had turned surprisingly cool, and stars blazed through the windows with an intensity city skies never allowed. "I've set up interviews in town tomorrow," Margaret said into the darkness. "There's a ranch looking for help, and the hardware store might need someone part-time." "I need to set up my workspace," Lily replied. "If I can get decent internet, I can still freelance while I look for something remote." "We'll figure it out," Margaret said, though she wasn't entirely sure how. Their savings would cover basic repairs and food for maybe a month. After that, they'd need income. "Mom," Lily's voice was smaller now, younger somehow, "what if we can't fix this place up? What if we've just traded one disaster for another?" Margaret turned toward her daughter, wishing she could see her face in the darkness. "Then we'll face that when it comes. But right now, this house is all we have. And I think maybe it's where we're supposed to be." The next morning, Margaret woke to find Lily already up, sitting cross-legged on the floor beside an open drawer, a leather-bound book in her hands. "What's that?" Margaret asked, pushing herself upright. "I found it in this desk drawer," Lily said. "It's Grandma Eleanor's journal." Margaret froze. "You shouldn't read other people's private thoughts. She's been dead for 6 years, Mom. And look at this." Lily turned the journal toward her, pointing to an entry from 1982. "The bank sent papers today. 3 months behind on taxes. They could take the house. I can't sleep, can't eat. This house has held 3 generations. How do I tell the children we might lose it? But I won't. I'll work every hour God gives me. I'll sell everything we don't need. This house saved us. I will save it." Margaret reached for the journal, her fingers trembling slightly. "She never told me about this." "She saved the house once," Lily said. "Maybe that's a sign we can too." As Margaret flipped through more pages, a folded piece of paper slipped out from between the leaves. She opened it to find a letter written in her own handwriting, a letter she'd written 15 years ago, but had never sent. "What's that?" Lily asked, noticing her mother's sudden pallor. Margaret quickly refolded the letter. Nothing important, but Lily was too quick, snatching the paper from her mother's hands. Her eyes widened as she read the first lines. "Dear Grandma, I cannot forgive you for what you told Robert about my past." "Give that back," Margaret demanded, reaching for the letter. Lily held it away. "What is this? What did she tell Dad about your past? Is this why he left us?" "Lily, stop." "No. You've kept so many secrets. Why did Dad really leave? What did Grandma tell him that was so terrible?" Margaret stood abruptly, grabbing the letter from her daughter's hand. "Some things from the past should stay in the past. We have work to do." But as she turned to leave the room, Lily's voice stopped her. "You can't keep running from whatever this is, Mom. Not anymore. Not when we're literally living in the middle of it. The next week fell into a rhythm of hard work and gradual progress. Margaret found temporary work at the Hayes Ranch, helping with office duties and occasionally pitching in with lighter ranch work. The pay was modest but steady, cash at the end of each day that went immediately toward supplies and repairs. Lily set up a workspace in the small bedroom that had once been Margaret's, using her laptop and a folding table they'd found at a thrift store. The internet situation proved challenging, but she managed to get a mobile hotspot that worked well enough for her freelance graphic design work. They cleaned the house room by room, scrubbing away years of dust and neglect. Margaret was surprised by how much satisfaction she found in the physical labor, in watching spaces transform under her hands. For the first time in months, she felt purposeful, even if the purpose was simply making a room habitable again. Their nearest neighbors, Daniel and Maria Garcia, stopped by on the third day, bringing fresh tortillas and curious smiles. "We wondered if anyone would ever come back to this place," Maria said, looking around approvingly at their progress. "Eleanor was such a good woman. She would be happy to see family here again." "Did you know her well?" Lily asked, eagerly accepting the still warm tortillas. Daniel nodded, leaning on his cane. "Everyone knew Eleanor. She was the heart of this community for 50 years. When people needed help, they came to her. When there was trouble, she was the first to offer solutions." "That sounds like the grandmother I remember," Margaret said softly. "You look like her," Maria observed. "Same strong eyes, same way of standing, like you're ready for whatever comes next." The fourth morning brought disaster. Margaret was checking the roof for the source of a leak when she heard a terrifying crack from inside the house, followed by Lily's scream. She rushed inside to find the kitchen ceiling had partially collapsed, sending chunks of plaster and rotted wood crashing to the floor. Lily stood pressed against the far wall, white-faced but unhurt. "That's it," Lily said, her voice shaking. "We can't stay here. This place is falling apart faster than we can fix it." "No one was hurt," Margaret insisted. "We'll get it repaired." "With what money? We barely have enough for groceries." "We'll figure it out. Daniel mentioned a contractor." "Stop it!" Lily's voice rose. "This is exactly what you always do. Hold on to things that are broken beyond repair. You did it with Dad, staying even when he clearly didn't love you anymore, and now you're doing it with this house." The words hit Margaret like physical blows. "That's not fair." "Isn't it? You never told me why Dad really left. I was 9 years old and suddenly he was gone. And all you would say was, 'Sometimes people don't stay together.' But I'm not a child anymore, and I deserve the truth." "What did Grandma tell him about your past that was so terrible?" Margaret felt the walls closing in, felt the weight of 15 years of careful silence pressing down on her. She hadn't wanted Lily to ever know, had protected her from the ugliness of the truth. But standing here, in Eleanor's house, with the ceiling literally falling around them, the old secrets suddenly seemed pointless. "Your father didn't leave us for another woman," Margaret said quietly. "He left because he found out I was a drug addict before you were born. I got clean when I found out I was pregnant with you, but I never told him about my past. Your grandmother did, during an argument we were having. She thought he had a right to know who he'd married." Lily stared at her mother, shock evident on her face. "You were an addict?" "Heroin. For 3 years in my early 20s. It nearly killed me." Margaret's hands trembled as she brushed plaster dust from her clothes. "Eleanor saved my life, got me into rehab, but when Robert found out, he couldn't handle it. He was afraid I'd relapse, afraid of what it might mean for you." "Why didn't you ever tell me?" "Because I was ashamed, and because I wanted you to love your father without reservation. If you'd known he'd abandoned us because of something in my past, something I couldn't change." Margaret shook her head. "It seemed better to let you believe it was about another woman. That's what everyone understands, what everyone accepts. How many of you have returned to a childhood home and found it changed, or perhaps found yourself changed? share your experiences in the comments, and don't forget to subscribe for more stories that touch the heart. The ceiling collapse proved to be both a crisis and a turning point. Margaret called Benjamin Santos, a local contractor recommended by Daniel, and he arrived within hours, a tall, broad-shouldered man with kind eyes and capable hands. He examined the damage carefully, poking at beams and testing the remaining structure. Main supports are still good, he pronounced finally. It's the cross beams that have rotted from old water damage. We can sister new beams alongside the old ones, reinforce what's there rather than replacing everything. What would something like that cost? Margaret asked, dreading the answer. Benjamin studied her for a long moment. For anyone else? Couple thousand at least. He rubbed his chin thoughtfully. For Eleanor's granddaughter, you help me with a job I've got coming up next month. Re-roofing the community center. Hard work, long days. You do that, and I'll help you fix the ceiling. You buy the materials, I provide the labor and expertise. Margaret felt something loosen in her chest. That's more than fair. Thank you. Don't thank me yet, Benjamin smiled. Eleanor kept my family fed for 6 months when I was out of work in '92. Never asked for anything in return. This community remembers its debts. That afternoon, Margaret and Lily went through Eleanor's files together. A truce of sorts established between them. Most of what they found was mundane. Old tax documents, receipts, correspondence that needed sorting. But at the back of the bottom drawer, Lily discovered a metal box sealed with tape that had yellowed with age. Inside were letters, dozens of them bundled with string and organized by year. The earliest dated back to 1968, the most recent to just months before Eleanor's death. These are from everyone, Lily said, spreading the letters on the floor. From your mother, from neighbors, from people she helped. She picked up one carefully. This one's from Dad, after he left. Margaret's hand trembled as she took the letter. Robert's handwriting, so familiar once, now seemed like a relic from another life. The letter was dated 6 months after he'd left them. Dear Eleanor, Margaret read aloud, I don't know if I have the right to write to you after what happened, but I need someone to understand. I still love Margaret, I always will. But finding out about her past that way, realizing she'd kept such a huge part of herself hidden from me for so many years, I felt betrayed. I felt like our entire relationship was built in a lie. I know addiction is a disease. I know she's been clean for years, but I can't stop thinking, what if she relapses? What if Lily is exposed to that world? The fear keeps me up at night. I'm not strong enough to live with that uncertainty. Maybe that makes me a coward. Maybe it just makes me human. Please look after them both. Make sure Lily knows I love her, even if I couldn't stay. And if Margaret ever asks about me, tell her I'm sorry. For not being the man she needed me to be. Margaret lowered the letter, her vision blurred with tears. All these years, she'd nursed her anger at Robert, believing he'd simply found her lacking. She'd never considered that his leaving might have been an act of fear rather than rejection. There are more, Lily said quietly, from him and from others. They found letters from neighbors thanking Eleanor for meals during hard times, from children she'd helped raise, and from Margaret's mother Elizabeth, confessing her failings as a parent and thanking Eleanor for being the mother Margaret needed. I never knew about any of this, Margaret said, holding a letter from Elizabeth. My mother never told me she wrote to Grandma. Maybe that's why Grandma saved these, Lily suggested. So someday you'd know the whole story. So we both would. One Saturday morning, while exploring the attic space, Lily found a tin of photographs, black and white images from the early days of the house, color prints from the 70s and 80s. Among them was a photograph of Eleanor as a young woman, standing proudly in front of the newly built house, her expression confident and hopeful. She looks so young here, Lily said, studying the image. The house looks beautiful. It was beautiful once, Margaret agreed. And it can be again. They decided to create a memory wall in the main room, arranging the photographs chronologically, adding some of the letters in frames alongside them. It became a visual timeline of the house and the lives it had contained, a testament to continuity and perseverance. As they worked, Lily seemed to be gathering her courage to ask something. Finally, she said, "When you were using drugs, what was that like?" Margaret's hands stilled. She'd never discussed this part of her life with her daughter before. "It was like dying by inches," she said finally. "Losing pieces of yourself so gradually you don't notice until there's almost nothing left." "What made you stop?" "Finding out I was pregnant with you." Margaret met her daughter's eyes. "I'd hit bottom, living on couches, stealing to support my habit, cut off from everyone who cared about me. Then I took that pregnancy test and suddenly there was something more important than the next fix. Someone who needed me to be better than I was. So I saved you," Lily said softly. "You did. And then Eleanor saved us both. She took me in when I had nowhere else to go, stood by me through withdrawal and recovery, helped me build a life for us." When the certified letter arrived from the county tax assessor's office, Margaret knew before opening it that their fragile peace was about to be shattered. 6 years of unpaid property taxes had accumulated since Eleanor's death, totaling just over $18,000. They had 60 days to pay in full, or the property would be sold at public auction. $18,000? Lily stared at the notice, her face pale. "We don't have $18,000. "I know." Margaret sank onto the newly repaired porch steps, the letter clutched in her hand. All their work, all their progress, it could all be for nothing. That evening, Daniel and Maria stopped by and immediately sensed something was wrong. When Margaret showed them the tax notice, Maria gasped. "Eleanor never mentioned tax problems," she said. "She probably didn't want to worry anyone," Daniel replied. "That was her way, carrying burdens alone rather than asking for help." After they left, Lily began searching online for information about property tax foreclosures, payment plans, anything that might help. Hours passed as she dug through county websites and legal documents. "Mom," she called suddenly, her voice strange. "Come look at this." Margaret joined her at the laptop. Lily had pulled up the property deed, available in the county's online records. "Look at the acreage," Lily said, pointing. The deed listed 15 acres. Margaret frowned. "That can't be right. This property is maybe 2 acres, 3 at most." "That's what I thought," Lily said. "But look." She'd pulled up a satellite image of the property. "See this? The property line doesn't stop at the garden. It goes all the way up that hillside." Margaret leaned closer, studying the image. Lily was right. The legal property line extended far beyond what she'd always thought of as their land, encompassing a significant hillside that rose behind the house. "Grandma used to take me up there," Margaret said slowly, memory stirring. "There was a flat area where she grew vegetables sometimes, said the elevation made them sweeter, and there was a spot with old foundation stones. She said her father had started building something there once, but never finished it." "That's all part of the property," Lily said. 13 acres we didn't even know we had." Have you ever discovered something valuable that was right under your nose all along? Something that changed everything? Tell us about it in the comments below. The next morning, Margaret called the county assessor's office. After being transferred 3 times, she finally reached someone who could help, a woman named Felicia Barrett, who pulled up their property records. "Yes, the deed shows 15 acres, Felicia confirmed, but it looks like only 2 acres are officially registered and assessed. The rest," she paused typing. "It looks like there's a notation here from 1965. Incomplete survey. The additional acreage was never properly registered with the county." "What does that mean?" Margaret asked. "It means legally you only own the 2 acres that are registered, even though the deed suggests more. To claim the full 15 acres, you'd need to provide proof of continuous family use and complete the registration process." "How long would that take?" "Normally several months, sometimes a year. But given your situation," Felicia hesitated, Ms. Reynolds, did you say Eleanor Martinez was your grandmother? Yes. There was a long pause. She helped my mother years ago. My family was going through a hard time, and Eleanor just showed up with food, with help, asking nothing in return. Another pause. I can expedite the process if you can provide the necessary documentation, proof of historical use, witness statements, surveys or maps showing the property boundaries. If you can get me that within 2 weeks, I can have the registration processed within 30 days. That would still put us past the 60-day deadline for the taxes, Margaret pointed out. Yes, but with the full property registered, the value increases substantially. You'd have options for financing that you don't have now. The tax office might even agree to a payment plan if they see you're working in good faith to resolve the situation. They spent the day gathering evidence. Daniel and Maria arrived that evening with 3 other elderly residents of the community, all willing to give statements about Eleanor's use of the entire property over decades. The following day, Margaret and Lily hiked up the hillside. The terrain was steeper than it looked, rough and overgrown, but as they climbed, evidence of past use became clear. Terrace areas where gardens had been, the remains of an irrigation system, fruit trees gone wild but still bearing. Near the top, on a flat area with sweeping views of the valley, they found the foundation stones Margaret remembered from childhood. They also discovered something unexpected, a hand-drawn map tucked inside a metal box near one of the boundary markers. The map showed the full property boundaries, drawn in Eleanor's unmistakable handwriting and dated 1952. Notes in the margins indicated planting locations, water sources, and future building plans that had never materialized. "This is ours," Lily said, breathless from both the climb and the realization. "All of this is ours." Within 2 weeks, they had compiled everything. The map, photographs, journal entries, letters, witness statements, and sent it all to Felicia. She called back within days. "This is solid documentation," she said. "I can work with this. Give me 2 weeks to process the registration. In the meantime, I'll contact the tax office and explain the situation. They should be willing to wait for the registration to complete before proceeding with foreclosure." While they waited, Harold from the hardware store stopped by unexpectedly one afternoon. He'd been cool to Margaret when she first arrived in town, clearly skeptical of her commitment to restoring Eleanor's house. Now he walked around the property, noting the progress they'd made, nodding with grudging approval. "Heard about your tax situation," he said finally, "and about the extra land up on the hillside." "Word travels fast," Margaret observed. "Small town." Harold gestured toward the hill. "That's good land up there. Flat area at the top could support a decent-sized structure. Been thinking about what this community needs, what Eleanor would have wanted." "And what's that?" Lily asked, joining them on the porch. "Trade school," Harold said. "Place where young people could learn practical skills. Carpentry, masonry, traditional building methods. Too many kids here with no prospects, no future. They leave for the cities, never come back. Or worse, they stay and get into trouble because there's nothing for them to do. No way to make a decent living." "Are you suggesting we turn this property into some kind of trade school?" Lily asked, clearly intrigued by the idea. "I'm suggesting you honor what Eleanor stood for," Harold replied. "She believed in this community, believed in giving people the tools they needed to help themselves. A place like that, up on the hill, with the house as its heart, she'd have loved that." The idea took root quickly. Over the next few days, Margaret and Lily developed a business plan for a small-scale restoration and traditional craft center, incorporating both the house and the hillside property. They calculated costs, potential revenue streams, community partnerships. The numbers weren't overwhelming, but they were viable if they could get past the initial hurdle of the tax debt. With the plan in hand, they approached Patricia Myers at the local bank. Patricia reviewed their proposals silently while Margaret and Lily sat across from her desk, trying not to show their desperation. "Eleanor Martinez was your grandmother," Patricia said finally, looking up at Margaret. "Yes. She loaned my father money once. This was 40 years ago. He was trying to start a small business. Couldn't get a bank to look at him twice. Eleanor gave him $500 from her own savings. Told him to pay it back when he could. No interest, no contract, just trust. She smiled slightly. He paid her back within a year. Used the success of that first business to build something bigger. He never forgot her kindness. She opened a folder on her desk. I'm prepared to offer you a loan for $15,000. Enough to cover most of the tax debt with some working capital for the business. Terms are reasonable. 5 years, low interest rate. Payments don't start for 90 days to give you time to get established. There's one condition, Patricia added. You have to promise me something. When someone else needs help the way you needed it today, when someone else is trying to build something meaningful but can't get traditional financing, you remember this moment. You help them the way Eleanor helped my father. You pass it forward. I promise, Margaret said, her voice rough with emotion. We both do. The day of the open house arrived 3 months later. The October sky, that particular shade of blue that seems to exist only in Montana autumn. Margaret woke before dawn, nerves humming through her body. Today they would show the community everything they'd accomplished. Today they would prove the house was truly saved, truly restored, truly alive again. The kitchen table, the heart of the home, stood ready to receive dishes and guests. Lily had set it with mismatched plates collected from thrift stores, making a virtue of variety rather than trying to hide it. Food prepared from Eleanor's recipes filled the kitchen with familiar scents. Tamales steaming in large pots, fresh tortillas wrapped in warm towels, apple pies cooling on every available surface. Max, a quiet 16-year-old who'd been struggling in school, arrived with 3 other teenagers from town. The boys were uncertain at first, but Margaret put them to work immediately, asking them to help serve food and explain the restoration work that had been done. The responsibility straightened their spines, brought purpose to their movements. This is what we're building, Margaret told them, gesturing toward the hillside where the workshop frame now stood visible. A place where you'll learn real skills, where you'll build things that matter, where you'll become people who can take care of yourselves and others. The first projects from the workshop were already taking shape. A beautifully crafted oak table that Max had made under Benjamin's guidance, traditional woven baskets created by a local artisan teaching the students ancient techniques, and a series of small wooden toys that would be sold at the upcoming Christmas market. Each piece represented not just a skill learned, but a connection formed, a sense of purpose discovered. Felicia arrived with the county assessor and the bank manager, Patricia. They walked through systematically, examining the work with professional eyes. The tax payment has cleared, Felicia announced, handing Margaret an envelope of papers. The property is officially current, all 15 acres properly registered and assessed. This house is yours, free and clear, except for the business loan. The relief that washed through Margaret was so intense it made her dizzy. Lily appeared at her elbow, having heard. She gripped her mother's arm, steadying her. We did it, she whispered. As the celebration continued, Margaret slipped away for a moment, finding herself in Eleanor's bedroom, her bedroom now, looking out the window at the land that stretched beyond. A soft knock made her turn. Robert stood in the doorway, looking older but still recognizable, still the man she'd once loved enough to change her life for. Lily called me, he said quietly, told me I should see what you two have accomplished. The house looks amazing, he continued after an awkward pause. And this program you're starting, it's incredible. Margaret, thank you. I read the letter you wrote to Eleanor after I left, he said finally. Lily showed it to me. And I want you to know, you were right to be angry. I was a coward. I ran because I was scared, not because I stopped loving you. I was angry for a long time, Margaret admitted. At you, at Eleanor, at myself. But I understand better now. We were all just doing the best we could with what we knew at the time. They returned to the gathering as friends who had made peace with the past, not as a couple rekindling romance. It was enough. Their shared love for Lily created a bridge between them, allowing them to move forward with mutual respect and understanding. 3 months later, On a January morning when frost rimmed the windows, Margaret stood on the porch watching Sofia Martinez's car pull up the drive. Sofia was a single mother with two young children, recently divorced and struggling to find affordable housing while she got back on her feet. When Margaret heard about her situation, she immediately offered the extra bedroom in the house. Just until you find something permanent, she'd said. No rush, no pressure. Sophia emerged from the car, her children tumbling out after her, their eyes wide as they took in the adobe house with its newly restored portal and freshly painted trim. Lily came out to join Margaret on the porch, both of them smiling welcome. Is this really okay? Sophia asked, uncertainty in her voice. Us staying here while we figure things out? More than okay, Margaret assured her. This house has sheltered 4 generations of my family through hard times. Now it's your turn. That evening, after Sophia and her children were settled, Margaret and Lily sat on the porch watching the sunset paint the winter sky in shades of pink and gold. The workshop on the hillside stood completed now, ready to welcome its first full class of students next week. Max and his friends had already produced a collection of handcrafted furniture and traditional crafts that were selling well in local markets, providing them not only with income, but with a sense of pride and accomplishment that was transforming their lives. We should take a photo, Lily said suddenly, like the one of Grandma Eleanor standing in front of the house when it was new. Stand in the same spot, continue the tradition. Margaret nodded, something catching in her throat. They positioned themselves where Eleanor had stood in that photograph taken decades ago. Lily set the timer on her phone, and they stood together, mother and daughter, the house rising behind them in the gathering dusk. When Lily checked the image, she smiled. Perfect, she said. We'll add it to the wall. Past and present, all connected. They went back inside where Sophia was setting the table for dinner, her children laughing as they helped. The house hummed with life, with possibility, with the quiet miracle of broken things made whole again. That night before sleep, Margaret read the final entry in Eleanor's journal, words written just weeks before her death. A house is not saved by its walls, but by the love that fills it. Build that, and you build something that outlasts wood and stone, something that carries forward when you're gone, something that catches others when they fall. Margaret closed the book gently, running her hand over its worn cover. Thank you, she whispered to the quiet room, for everything. Outside, the Montana winter wrapped the house in stillness. Inside, 4 generations of love and perseverance, struggle and triumph, loss and renewal continued to echo through the walls. The house stood as it had for 70 years, not just a structure, but a promise, that broken things could be mended, that lost things could be found, that endings could become beginnings if someone cared enough to do the work.